You cannot make strategic decisions from attribution. You cannot make operational decisions from MMM, right? And also you can't test everything. Though we are all for experimentation culture, for most of the brand, it's an overhead, right? So you should be testing what absolutely needs testing. So this multi-modal approach primarily enables actioning for the marketers, where everything else is abstracted away, but making sure that everything is transparent as well. So every assumption that has gone into your model building has to be transparent, should be open for scrutiny.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Rajeev Nair, co-founder and chief product officer at Lifesight. Lifesight is a unified marketing measurement platform that allows marketers to leverage advanced measurement techniques. In this episode, we explore digital astrology and the attribution illusion, how quasi-experiments can help marketing teams, how to make sense of conflicting measurement methods, and when will AI agents run marketing measurement on their own. All that and a bunch more stuff after a super quick word from one of our awesome partners. This episode is brought to you by MoEngage and their new warehouse native CEP, which revolutionizes the way data should be seamlessly fetched, analyzed, and activated. Now you can use MoEngage Cloud Data Sync to sync your warehouse data with MoEngage and use it to segment audiences or personalize messages without any development. Just set and forget. Use MoEngage warehouse segments to create segments on your warehouse data without moving underlying events, properties, or proprietary segmentation logic, and activate them directly on MoEngage. Using warehouse data analytics, brands can also directly generate insights from their warehouse data. Your long search solution for seamless data sync, smarter segmentation, dynamic personalization, and delightful customer experiences ends here. Warehouse native CEP from MoEngage, making it easy, smart, and secure. Learn more at moengage.com. Rajeev, thanks so much for joining the show today. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Phil. Super excited to join you on this podcast. Looking forward to it.
We've chatted with a lot of attribution measurement focused folks who are experts in the space, building in the space, or consulting, freelancing in the space. And I was really interested in a lot of the work that Lifesight is doing around causal machine learning and your unified measurement framework. So I'm excited to take a deep dive in here with you. But maybe we can start with your thoughts on attribution. It's the polarized topic with a lot of marketing ops folks today. When I chat with listeners, it continues to be one of the top topics that people are confused about or trying to figure out. So you've actually said that much of marketing attribution as we know it is scientifically flawed. In a LinkedIn post, you wrote that marketing has evolved a lot from the TV Mad Men days to TikTok, but our measurement methods are kind of frozen in time, and we're chasing vanity metrics instead of true effectiveness. Maybe chat about that a little bit. Like, can you unpack why you think traditional attribution is broken? Do you still think that multi-touch attribution or click-based attribution is still useful for something today, like content effectiveness or path to purchase? What are your thoughts there?
Sure, Phil. So the way attribution is used in practice today in the industry is to essentially do user tracking, right? So attribution has come to mean user tracking, right? Now the problem with this is when we approach any measurement solution, we are primarily interested in two things. Are we able to understand the cause and effect? So if you observe certain events, are we able to understand the causes that is leading to these events? So that's in the truest sense, that's the meaning of attribution, right? So if you look up the word attribution dictionary, it has a cause and effect connotation associated with it. So that is missing in the way attribution is practiced today. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is the marketing ecosystem today is pretty complex, right? So you have got a bunch of different factors. You've got your paid media variables, your own media channels. You're running a lot of promotions, giving a lot of discounts, making a lot of price variations and all of that. Right? So it's a pretty complex process. So for you to make any meaningful optimization decision across all those factors, you need to understand what is each of these factors incrementally offering you, right? How are they incrementally driving your outcome? So the attribution, the way it is practiced today, doesn't solve for causality, doesn't solve for incrementality, right? So that's our primary problem with attribution, right? And that's why we believe that it's broken. The meaning of the word in itself is sort of changed in today's marketing context to just mean tracking, and it has got diluted significantly.
Yeah. I feel like what you're saying is part of the problem is in the word itself, like the definition of the
Mhm.
word. Like I've worked with plenty of companies where if we throw around the word attribution, it's synonymous with multi-touch attribution. We've had some guests on the show that kind of explain it as like attribution is a bucket of figuring out what is driving effectiveness, what is driving revenue for marketing. And MTA and click-based stuff is just one of the methods of doing that. And last touch, first touch, multi-touch, incrementality, causal stuff, like all of those things are different methodologies under the bucket of attribution. But we throw around the word attribution, everyone instantly just like goes right to MTA, and
Yeah.
MTA is going to tell us what drove revenue. And like you said, a lot of folks have also pointed out the issue with cause and effect there, and even like correlation and some of the signals we're getting. Like it's behavioral analytics from what we can see. And that's like the part where I find is really hard to defend with MTA. What we can see is diminishing all the time, and what we can stitch together in terms of like a user's online journey is also diminishing. So
Mhm.
yeah, MTA is really hard to defend, but like you built Lifesight 7 years ago, right? Like you've been in the space for a long time. The initial product that you guys were working on was third-party measurement to solve user journey attribution. And to solve for some of that like journey stitching, you were using ID graphs. Basically, you were in the credit distribution game, right? Like some of the stuff
Yes.
that you're talking about. And at some point, chatting with customers or, researching more stuff about this space, you discovered that this didn't lead to enabling businesses to make better decisions. We weren't like signaling what was driving revenue. There was no causality in what you were doing. So maybe chat about like that pivot, like what led
Sure.
you to discovering that baselines and incrementality were
Sure.
missing from the approach, and you kind of went towards that area.
Sure. So let me first unpack this attribution problem a little bit more. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think you very clearly sort of articulated the technical limitations in having this user journey built.
Hmm.
So there are a bunch of privacy concerns. You can't track all the user exposure, all the user touch points. Now, most of the retail businesses are omni-channel, right? So you've got your digital media, social media, offline spend. There are a bunch of other offline events. Your sales channels are also, some of it is in your direct-to-consumer website. Then you have product placed in marketplaces. You have your offline stores and things like that. So it's very hard for you to technically build the user journey. But let's assume that somehow you managed to do this, right? That you have the most perfect user journey available. You have got all your touch points of all your customers properly captured. Now the question is, uh, what do you observe in this particular data, right? So we have come through that journey, right? We have been, as you rightly said, when we started up, we wanted to solve this attribution problem. And our philosophy was that we will try to build the most comprehensive user journey possible across both first party and third party data, building the most exhaustive identity graph and all of that, right? So even once you have all the data that you need, what you would finally see in the data is a lot of spurious correlation, right? So let
Hmm.
me give you a couple of examples. So your bottom of the funnel would always be highly correlated with your outcomes, right? Because in the whole journey, more people are engaging with your bottom of the funnel right before they transact. So you will
Right.
find a lot of a very high correlation between certain parts of this data with the outcome that you are interested in optimizing for. Um, Now, from this correlation, we need to glean out causality, right? So we have all heard this cliche that correlation does not imply causality, but the
Hmm.
other side of the same equation is there is no causality without correlation. So correlation is a
Hmm.
necessary condition, but it's not the sufficient condition. So
Right.
so causality is essentially correlation plus bias. Can we somehow manage the bias so that we could interpret the observed correlation as causality? It's a very hard problem to solve only from multi-touch attribution data. Let me give you a couple of examples here, okay? So let's assume that there's this one physical store that you have, and you've kept a billboard right in front of the store. So every user that walks into your store, they see this billboard. Now, can we say that this billboard is driving the walk-ins? Now, once these people are in your store, say you're offering some discounts, and a lot of people are redeeming these discounts and they're making a purchase. So they were showing high intent by walking into your store. Is this coupons or discounts incrementally driving more outcomes? So these
Right.
are very difficult problems to only address from your journey data.
Hmm.
Perhaps if you have two stores, you could keep a billboard in front of one store and not in front of the other, and that would give you a meaningful lift number. If you have again two stores, you could give discounts in one and not in the other, and here you are making some interventions and measuring a difference. But if you look at attribution, it just shows a lot of correlation. It's very hard to infer causality from this data, right? So that's the fundamental problem with attribution. Now, we have had similar issues when we started the attribution journey at
Hmm.
Lifesight. So we were, in fact, helping a lot of brands measure the out-of-home billboards and things like that. So some of these
Okay.
questions actually came to us. Do we
Hmm.
know the incremental contribution of these things? So we started working on incrementality testing back in the day in 2019, 2020. Our approaches were different. We used to have exposed devices, and then we used to do lookalike modeling, and we used to create synthetic control devices, and we used to measure the lift between these two. So approaches were different, but as part of our research into the space, we sort of moved to more identity agnostic way of measuring lift. That's with geotest and things like that. Right. So that's been the journey.
Very cool. Yeah, it's cool to hear why you went down that path. I think that a lot of folks in the space, like some of your competitors, haven't had that light bulb moment yet. Like they still sell MTA products and they still claim that we can stitch the whole journey together. And I feel like, we can chat about this later too, but like a lot of the MTA analogies are from folks that are just used to MTA just being the thing that you get to show the finance team and your senior management team that, what I did last month, the money I spent, like this, it drove to this much revenue. But you mentioned geotest, so I want to unpack that a little bit. We've had some folks chat about this. But so incrementality tests, geotests are kind of a part of that. A lot of the criticism for incrementality tests and geotests that there's often a large cost associated with it. It's not a $0 endeavor, especially like if you're a huge company and you've got a massive monthly ads budget. You want to figure out if those ads are incremental or not. You have to turn 50% of them off. 50% of $20 million is $10 million per month. Like that's a huge cost there. Obviously smaller for startups. But the thing with geotests is that it's not a true incrementality test, right? Like randomization is the core element of control groups and treatment groups. And then at geotest, we're handpicking the regions and not doing it like we would in a mass market incrementality test. Maybe chat about some of the limitations of incrementality tests and geotests. What are your thoughts there?
Sure. So there's this thing called fundamental problem with causal inference, right? So before we get into geotest, let me try to explain that particular problem. So, for example, in an organization, say you have launched a new policy, right? Now you want to measure if your employees are happy about this, right? But there's only one reality. You have launched the policy, right? Now you are measuring this, right? You don't have the counterfactual of in another universe where you didn't launch this policy, right? So that counterfactual is never visible. In geotesting cases, we are creating a counterfactual. So we pick a few geographies and we are creating a counterfactual, which is a set of geographies, another set of geographies. And we're making an intervention in your treatment cluster. And the other set is what is used as counterfactual. So you're assuming that um, from the past, these two set of geographies were very similar in the way they were contributing your revenue or whatever outcome. So you're assuming your counterfactual or your control group will continue as is because you're not intervening there, right? But you're making some interventions in your treatment cluster. Now you could measure this difference. Now, most of the pushback that we get for geotesting is the primary concern is that it's costly, right? Because
Hmm.
most of these tests has to run for a period of 3 to 5 weeks, right? So it's a slow process and it's a very rigorous process. It's a lot of overhead on the marketer because they've got a lot of
Yeah.
other things to worry about. Now they need to spend 3 to 5 hours running a test, and it has to be, you have to babysit the test, right? You have to control for
Yeah.
a lot of things. So there's opportunity cost. Now, the other factor that you mentioned, you will have to scale up or hold out your investment on certain channels in certain
Hmm.
geographies. And these geographies might be contributing a significant chunk of your revenue. But for those things, there are statistical solutions. So we could create a test where your opportunity cost is the lowest possible. Right? We could pick the group of cities or states which perhaps only contribute to 5 to 10% of your revenue, and we could we could run a test in the shortest possible time, but making sure that we don't compromise on the statistical power of the test. So there are ways in which some of these things could be addressed. But having said that, it needs more commitment from the marketing team, right, to run these tests and to get these reads back to your optimization system. But having said that, uh, this is a better way to measure as well. Right? Here you have got more control. This is a slower process, but you could adopt the learning with more confidence, right? Unlike other measurement system. So the framework that we have in mind is, so you have got a fast system of measurement. The
Hmm.
fastest is being attribution perhaps, but it is less accurate and less actionable. Then you have models, right, that you could create on your historical data, which is something that you could create in a few days to a couple of weeks. Now, the problem with the models is you won't have high confidence on all the reads that you get. Right? So, for example, if you are having 10 input variables and you're trying to understand the impact of all of this, some of these input variables could be sparse. You could have certain data challenges around multicollinearity and things like that, which means you cannot interpret the reads on those variables with high degree of confidence.
Hmm.
So that's when you should move to testing, right? So you should first have a process in place where you could generate intelligent hypotheses so that you are using up your bandwidth the right way, right? Running the
Hmm.
right tests, the most important ones. And for everything else, you could have quasi experiments, which is where your model sort of comes in.
And,
Yeah,
and like the quasi experiment stuff is where you're talking about like minimizing the opportunity cost of some of these tests, because like the part that I've struggled with doing this in practice is that like it sounds really good to minimize the opportunity cost. Marketing team is kind of reassured a little bit, but when you dig into the minimal detectable effect of how long you need to run this to get the right sample size,
yeah.
then like the opportunity cost is still kind of growing, and you're looking at like, oh, how close are we to get like that sample size to me? Maybe try to bet that a little bit, like the minimal detectable effect variable
True.
in this whole like incrementality testing. How do you think about that?
True, true. Yeah. So there are a couple of approaches, right? So primarily, what we are trying to do is we are trying to infer causality, right? We are trying to do causal inference,
Mm-hmm.
and there are broadly two ways in which we could do this. One way is what we call quasi-experiment, or it's also popularly known as natural experiment, which means your historical data in itself would have enough variations in it for you to infer causality from it, right? So the first entry point to incrementality test or incrementality reads is to create models on your historical data and see if you can infer causality out of it. So this is where your MMM system comes in. Now, coming to your question on the incrementality test itself. Uh, yes, it's very important to design the test in such a way that you get conclusive outcomes out of this, right? So let's take an example. So say there is a particular brand which is spending $1 million a month, and the brand gets $5 million out in revenue, right? So this is 5x. Your blended ROAS is 5x. Now this particular brand wants to test a new channel, right? So the next month they introduce a new channel. They spend just $50,000. So now your spend is $1,050,000, and they see a revenue of 6 million. Okay. So this is a test. I've just added a new variable. But this $50,000 is giving me 1 million of delta. which is a 20x ROAS. So the question is, was this a good test? Was that additional 1 million the result of some other seasonal factors, right? So this is an example of longitudinal study or time testing, right? So that 1 million is perhaps because it's December or it's whatever, it's your peak period, it's winter and you're selling winter clothes. So this $50,000 is not driving that. So you should design a test so that the investment should primarily make sense, that it should be able to drive an effect that is detectable, and also you should factor in all these seasonal things. So that's where geo-testing is important, because geo-testing is not this time-based testing. In geo-testing, you're taking December and you're picking two set of geographies that work very similarly on all the previous Decembers for which you have data, right? And then you are adding a new channel for, say, one of those geography cluster. Now, you could make a meaningful inference. So testing, as I said, is perhaps the best approach, but it's a very rigorous approach. Design of testing is what you should get absolutely right, because rest of the testing, which is to deploy the test, get the read back, and compute the lift, all of those are trivial in some ways. You could easily operationalize that. But if you get the design wrong, then you would end up having a test which is not conclusive. You have wrong reads out of it, and there are a bunch of different problems. Now, the opportunity cost minimization that I spoke about was that when you design the test, you could perhaps design the test which is of shorter duration. But having said that, you will have to invest more if you want to reduce the duration. But if you want to run a powerful test, that is mostly a slightly longer duration test, lower spend, but it would take more time to do. But you could complement or augment this entire testing process with the natural experiments. Right? That's where MMM sort of comes in. Right? If you have 10 factors for which you need to measure incrementality, you need not test all 10. The first responsibility is to generate the right hypothesis that warrants testing, and MMM is a very good hypothesis generator.
You get a hypothesis from MMM, and then you go off and do an experiment to validate the insights or what the MMM is telling you. You mentioned causal inference there a few times in our chat, and I'm curious if you can unpack that for listeners. It was a new term for me just a couple months ago. Like, causal machine learning takes causal inference a step further when we're talking about this in the incrementality context. Instead of like using statistical methods to identify causal effects, causal machine learning uses machine learning to estimate causal effects. Can you break that down for us? Like, is it true that causal ML is a way to move beyond simply identifying correlations to understanding the underlying mechanisms that drive outcomes, it basically allowing us for more robust, explainable models? Break that down for us.
Absolutely. So, a causal inference is an umbrella term, and the most popular way of doing causal inference that perhaps everyone has heard about is the clinical trials when it comes to testing medicines, right? So let's take an example. So there is a medicine that you want to test whether it cures someone of a disease. So you've created a treatment group of people. You give them the medicine. You wait for some time, and then there's another group of people to whom you give a placebo. You wait for, say, a few weeks and see if the people who got the medicine are they better off than the other group. And let's say you get good results, right? Now, if you look a little deeper, perhaps your treatment group was all female, age between 25 to 45. And your control group was all male, perhaps age less than 25, right? Which means they were incomparable to start with, right? So this is the case of, can we infer causality from correlation? You're observing correlation, but in this case, you cannot, because there's bias associated with it.
Right.
How to debias? You should have both cohorts with similar composition, right? That's where randomization comes in, right? So if you're testing this to understand the efficacy of this drug in Canada, then your treatment and the control group should have the right representation of Canadian population, right? That's when that's when it's comparable. Now, this is causal inference. This is causal inference where we are controlling for the bias by treating or by designing an experiment properly and running the experiment for a few weeks and making some inference out of it. Now, the truth about marketing is everything in marketing is quasi-causal in some way, because we don't have a laboratory setting where we could test Facebook's efficacy. Right? It is getting tested in the real world. And that's problem number one. Problem number two is, once a drug is tested, you have discovered a universal truth about that drug. But that's not true about Facebook's performance for your business, right? That is going to change next quarter, the quarter after that. So the testing here, you're not discovering any universal truth. You are discovering that Facebook is working for you today in this season. You have to repeat this in another quarter, right? So from that perspective, everything in marketing is slightly quasi-causal always. Now, in causal ML, what we are doing is this is a very important approach. Right? Geotesting essentially does this. Instead of taking individual cohorts, we take geography cohorts, and that has got its own utility, right? Because geotesting is a common framework which can do apple-to-apple comparison between Facebook and Google and TikTok, because it's a common testing framework. You cannot get something similar out of platform lift studies in Facebook, right? Because it's sort of a black box. Though there are a lot of documentation, it's still a bit of a black box. So you can't compare Facebook to Google by just relying on Facebook and Google platform lift study. So that way, geotesting is very, very, very useful. Now, coming to causal ML, so there's this field of causal AI, right? The whole philosophy here is we could find smart experiments hidden within your historical data, right? So, and that's a faster way to observe a few things. And in a lot of cases, this is the only ethical way of doing things as well. For example, if you need to understand the impact of smoking in cancer, right? We can't create two groups of people and get one of them to smoke, right? So that's not ethical. So we'll have to infer things from the data that's out there. And this is a Nobel Prize winning idea. In 2021, the Nobel Prize went to this causal inference on observational data, right? So that's when this term called natural experiment sort of became very, very popular. Now, the problem with most of the algorithm that is emerging out of the causal AI spaces, they don't have the kind of maturity, I would say, when compared to the ML algorithms that's very popular in the industry. So, for example, if you're familiar with supervised learning or regression-based approaches, right? So there you have certain framework to understand accuracy, understand fit in terms of R square. You could do back testing, right? You will get the ground truth data, create a model and test the model on some holdout data. So there's some framework that is very evolved and matured in the ML side, which is not that evolved in the causal AI space. So what we are doing is we are adopting certain approaches from the causal AI space. One specific approach is this thing called structural causal modeling, which is when we see all the data, we try to first impose certain assumptions on how these variables are interacting with one another. And on top of that, we apply regular ML. Right? It could be Bayesian regression, ridge regression, or whatever. But what this enables us to do is, when it comes to MMM, there are a lot of implicit assumptions in data transformation, in the way the variables interact with each other and all of that. So all these assumptions can be properly codified into the causal graph, and that becomes a very useful communication layer between the modeler or between the data scientist and the marketer, right? So in the causal DAG, we could have things like so your top of the funnel variables, they are driving your Google brand search spend, right? So Google's brand search spend is not an independent variable. You tend to spend more in Google brand search if your TV ad is working really well for you, because a lot of people would come and search for your brand. So there's this interaction, right? If you think of this from a regression perspective, these are just two variables. And the assumption is that they're independent of one another in any regression modeling, right? There's this assumption called independently and identically distributed assumption, right? So we assume that they are independent of one another, which is not true, right? They are dependent. Your click-based variables, if you're paying per click, you would end up more click if your top of the funnel is really working for you, right? So these assumptions are first encoded in some causal language, and then we use regression approaches to understand the true impact. So this way, some of the time-tested ML approaches in MMM, right, which is your regression-based approach, essentially, right? The different ways in which you could transform the data, you could do time series decomposition, and a bunch of different things, are brought into the world of causality, and you have a hybrid solution. Eventually, perhaps a better causal AI algorithm might evolve, right? In which case, you perhaps don't need causal ML. You could do everything in causal AI, but currently that's not the case, right? So I mean, that's I hope it all made sense. So that's how that's the whole spectrum of causal inference. You have experiments and you have natural experiments, right? But natural experiments has got its own limitations as well. So if your data is sparse, so you have a new variable,
Right.
which is very sparse, the model would struggle to truly understand its impact. That's when you should go to the experiment, right?
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's KNAK, and tell them we sent you.
This episode is brought to you by Revenue Hero. You've invested thousands in your marketing funnel, targeted the right ICP, spent weeks A/B testing, and optimized for conversion at every step. Finally, a high-intent prospect fills out your demo form, and then nothing. Your nurtured lead sits in a queue while you chase them with, "How's Thursday at 2 p.m.? Meanwhile, your competitor is already on a discovery call. That's not just frustrating, that's revenue walking away. With Revenue Hero, you can qualify, route, and book leads with the right rep, so your team can start real conversations right away. For the ops folks listening, Revenue Hero syncs meeting data to your CRM, auto-credits no-shows, recalibrates when reps go on vacation, and has a ton of smart features you won't find anywhere else. If you're spending to drive demand, don't lose it at the last mile. Visit revenuehero.io/demo today.
Very cool. Like, the thing that stands out to me, and I appreciate your detailed breakdown there, like the difference between how Causal AI thinks of experimentations is instead of going out and doing natural experiments in market and figuring out, the design of that experiment and babysitting it, like you said in your previous answer, we're instead looking at historical data and trying to uncover hidden experiments that are within data that we already have.
Yeah.
And then we can infer causality based on that. Is that the right way to think about it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Very cool. And so, like, we talk a lot about like these different methods, right? So like marketing operations folks like are just hearing about Causal AI maybe for the first time. They're just like scratching the surface on like what is MMM, what is simplified MMM models. They're trying to like turn the leaf on MTA and trying to go more towards incrementality. Like there's so many different methods, and this idea of like triangulation, like figuring out, there's limitations with all of these methods, right? And knowing them is super important. And then like a lot of folks recommend that we still do all of them, and then we try to figure out what are the best signals from all of these things. And you guys like spent a lot of time thinking about this. You're calling this like the unified measurement framework, where you're advocating for like multi-modal or like unified measurement approach. What does that mean for you exactly? Like, what does that look in practice? And what do we do with that information if a bunch of these different methods are all pointing at different solutions? Like MMM is telling me that this thing is really good, And then Causal AI is telling me that that thing is actually really bad, but this thing is really good. Like, what do we do with all of that information?
Yeah. So when it comes to marketing optimization, right, we are trying to make decisions at different levels, right? So certain decisions are very strategic. So you are thinking a few quarters down the line. Certain decisions are very tactical. You're worried about this month and the next. And certain decisions are very operational, right? You are worried about today, tomorrow, this week, next week, right? So for each level of this decisioning, you need different capabilities. So that's why all these different techniques are very important, right? So you can't use MMM to decide whether you should scale up or scale down a creative today, right? And that level of operational decisioning is becoming more important by the time, because today marketers can create many different creative variations very easily, right?
Yeah.
So if your incrementality testing says Facebook prospecting can be scaled up, then the question is, okay, I've got this 20, 30 creatives. How do I manage my budget within these creatives? So for some of these decisioning, you would need multi-touch attribution, right? So though we have spoken against multi-touch attribution, this is perhaps one use case. So we are not
Uh,
saying that multi-touch attribution is like absolutely of no utility.
mhm.
But there are some of these use cases whereby you could make your operational decisions based on touch-based attribution, but the scope is very limited. So when we talk about unified marketing measurements approach, uh, we are sort of bringing all these techniques and we are enabling seamless orchestration between each of them. The most important thing that gets missed out in this discussion is there is a layer of abstraction on top of all of this. So when a marketer visits a unified marketing measurement system, though we talk about how robust our modeling is, how we design experiments and all of that, finally what a marketer see is a neat planning tool, not even a dashboard. A planning tool to which you could ask certain questions, right? You could say that how could I drive my revenue up to X dollars next quarter? I've got Y dollars to spend. What is the right mix? What would happen if I add extra affiliate partners? What would happen if I change the price? So one major criticism is that this creates analysis paralysis, right? You have got a lot of reports and all of that. But the point that a lot of people miss is these are specific details. Finally, what a marketer sees is a planning tool, right? Now, if the marketer is really interested in knowing how the modeling works, how robust it is, how do you model for ad stock, how do you model for saturation, and a bunch of different things, how do you forecast? Of course, we could get into the more specific statistical approaches that sort of covers everything. But unified measurement is primarily an action-driven system, right? So analysis paralysis could happen in any framework. So there's this very popular book that has sort of influenced me quite a bit. So this book is called Decision-Driven Analytics. It was written by a Wharton professor called Stefano Pantoni, right? So what it says is you start by thinking about the decision that you want to make, and then use the data to see if it supports within what confidence range, right? So if you think that you want to change your price, approach analytics with that decision in mind. So it's not that you see a lot of dashboards and then you're lost in it, right? So from that perspective, one thing, this is an absolute necessity, right? You cannot make strategic decisions from attribution. You cannot make operational decisions from MMM, right? And also you can't test everything. Though we are all for experimentation culture, for most of the brand, it's an overhead, right? So you should be testing what absolutely needs testing, right? So this multi-modal approach. So we only very recently we started calling this unified marketing measurement, but even in early 2023 we had this multi-modeling approach, right, where we had attribution, we had incrementality test, everything in one platform. So this is a necessity, but it's very important that unified measurement vendors like us also primarily enables actioning for the marketers, right? Where everything else is abstracted away, but making sure that everything is transparent as well. So every assumption that has gone into your model building has to be transparent, should be open for scrutiny. Your algorithms should be transparent. How do you forecast should be transparent. Documentation should be there. So it shouldn't be the case that we just take the customer data, create a model, and just plug some insights in the UI, right? The process of creating a model should happen in the platform. So that's when UMM become transformational. Otherwise, it's just a BI tool.
Right. Yeah, no, it's super interesting the way that you're talking about this in the sense that a lot of folks think of measurement as this like retrospective tool to look at like what worked and what drove revenue. You're trying to like spin that in measurement should be in this unified framework, a forward thinking tool and helping you figure out business decisions and what to do next, focusing on actions. What like how do you handle customers that come to you and they're just like, we want to use Lifesight to figure out like our business question is where do we invest more dollars in? We want to know what is working, what is driving revenue so that I can cut the shit that isn't working and I can double down on the stuff that is working. That's my business decision. All of these different ways of measuring what is working, what is not working to inform that decision. You're saying that like there are drawbacks to all of these methods, but there are specific spots that are operational for and better tuned for certain methods and things that are better tuned for. Is that the right way to think about it? How do you think about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll perhaps take a very precise example, right?
Yeah.
Let's say there is this one particular brand who has their own direct-to-consumer website in Shopify, and say they also sell products in Amazon, right? So you've got two sales channels. Now you've got a bunch of factors that is driving your direct-to-consumer revenue. So this is the price of your product, all your paid media activities, your own media, right, which is your email, your SMS, and things like that. And perhaps you're earning a lot of discounts and promotion in your Shopify website, right? So you've got a bunch of factors. Now in Amazon, perhaps you have got your Amazon ads that you would see when you go to the Amazon website, or perhaps you would also have the Amazon ad displayed across the internet in different other Amazon network publishers, which would redirect back to the Amazon. So in these cases, what we would do is we will create a model explaining your D2C revenue. We'll create a model explaining your Amazon revenue. But in these cases, there are a lot of interaction that could possibly happen between this. Your spend that is primarily meant to drive your D2C traffic or D2C conversion could create some halo effect on Amazon as well, right? People might also go and search the product in Amazon after seeing a Facebook ad. Vice versa is also possible. So we create two models by applying absolute modeling rigor at each level. And once we get good models, we can easily merge this model and create a master model, which is for your revenue forecast, right? Overall revenue forecast. So you could do forecast and optimization for Amazon. You could do forecast and optimization for D2C, or you could do forecast and optimization for your overall revenue. So this is the starting point. This entire process is just a few days away for any brand in most of the cases. Once this is done, the insight, besides the insight, right, there will be a bunch of things that you could get out of this. Most important thing is that we should also raise a few warnings, right? If we see that your Facebook prospecting and Google top of the funnel are very highly correlated, then model would always struggle to actually distinguish one from the other, right? That's a modeling reality. So it's very important that we flag this to the user, right? Though we have got some reads, we are not very confident about, say, Google top of the funnel because it is highly correlated with Facebook, right? If there are affiliate variables, MMM model mostly struggles with affiliate variable because there are many different affiliate business models, right? So in one of the business model, you end up paying a commission to an affiliate partner after the sales has happened. So here the spend happens after the revenue, right? Which is opposite to the MMM assumption, which is you first have an investment or spend and then you get a revenue. So in affiliate, so there are cases where we should raise a few warnings. So these warnings are hypotheses, right? So we are essentially telling you that for those variables, before you make any decision, you should ideally be testing. But having said that, there are a lot of other variables which are already well understood. So you can start scaling up or scaling them down with a very high degree of certainty and confidence. But some of the other variables needs testing. And testing from the modeling perspective is an extremely important part, because what testing also provides you is a process called calibration, right? So calibration is whereby we have understood a particular coefficient with a very high degree of confidence. Now we can tell the model that when the model try to find the coefficient by its own methods, you try to minimize the distance between model generated coefficient and the experiment generated coefficient for that period for which the test has happened. So there's a process called calibration, right? And that improves. So even if you could calibrate just one variable, it could it could improve the modeling accuracy across the spectrum for everything. So that's what makes experiment a more important thing. It in itself could enable a lot of decisioning, but once it comes back to the model through this iterative process of model calibration, that improves the entire measurement framework, right? So this is one part of your triangle, right, where MMM and experiment sort of talks to each other. Then you have attribution as well, right, where the biggest problem with attribution is this duplication problem, right? So when you get a revenue, all your ad platforms is taking credit for that. So finally, your attributed revenue is 20% more than your actual revenue. So when you bring attribution to this thing, you need attribution for this operational decisioning, right? But at the same time, we could calibrate attribution also from certain multipliers that we could generate from the MMM and experiment side. So the major controversy associated with this process is that it's not scientific, right? That getting this multiplier from MMM and applying that to attribution number is not very scientific. I agree to that in some extent. But what we're essentially doing is we have gotten, so the reads that you get from MMM is an average read. Yeah? We are trying to understand the average impact of Facebook. So that average number we are percolating down to your more granular numbers like ad set, ad ID, creative, and all of that. So that way it has its utility, and it can do deduplication of your attribution numbers as well. So that's how the system works, right? Where each of these methods complement the other, and overall you have a better program, right? A marketing program or a marketing orchestration between all of these things. And most importantly, you have system to make strategic decisions, tactical decisions, and operational decisions, right?
One of the popular criticisms for having measurement vendors do a bunch of different methodologies and allow users and marketers to see different answers for some of the same questions is that the turnover for CMOs in tech is so short that, you know, they to survive in their jobs, they need to show their impact on revenue. So they buy a tool to validate their existence versus actually informing what is working, what is not working. And so like if they buy a unified measurement vendor approach and it introduces this like element of variability, maybe you don't like what the MMM results are showing you, you just tweak this lever here and you give more weight to MTA, and here, boom, now your campaigns and the money that you've advocated for shows things a bit more favorably. How do you think about that versus like being true to what the data is telling you versus allowing your buyers to tweak the levers to justify their existence and their investments?
Yeah. So there's this saying that you could torture the data and it will confess to anything. But with the unified marketing measurement sort of systems, if you torture the data, it will show in the UI, right? So the only way in which you could create a model that agrees with your assumptions or that sort of agrees with your story, all those configurations are there in the UI, open to scrutiny, right? So the assumptions that you have incorporated could be scrutinized by everyone. So it's a very open system that way. And the way I think about this is, so far everything that we discussed, it's we could classify that as the hard problem of attribution, right? So we've been talking about statistics, the technicalities on how to create the model and things like that. But there's a soft problem of attribution, which is that every other business function is becoming more deterministic and more optimized. So your HR function, IT function, product building, supply chain, everything is very deterministic. It's becoming better year on year. But marketing is what is becoming more challenging and more probabilistic. So your business leaders, your CFOs, your CEOs are sitting on a bunch of very deterministic numbers. There's nothing probabilistic about a loss of $3 million, right? So they're sitting on top of those red numbers. And then the marketing org comes with a lot of uncertainty and a probabilistic interpretation of what's happening. So that's a soft problem, right? So the only way to address that is to be very transparent about the communication, very transparent about how you have arrived at those problems. And the reality of reality is that it's uncertain, right? Right? So and there's no way in which we can wish that away. This is something we see a lot of marketers coming to terms with. So your MMM numbers will never be as glamorous as your attribution numbers. Especially, it will never be as glamorous as your self-reported attribution numbers, right? Because we are primarily interested in incrementality. But the important thing about these incrementality numbers is they are easily verifiable, right? You could easily prove or disprove that these numbers are wrong by adopting a few techniques. So you could create a forecast. You need not adopt the recommendation. So that's what we recommend all our brands as well, right? When we create a first model, you can use the model to create a forecast. You tell the model that this is what you have planned to invest for next month or next 2 months. The model will create a forecast. See if the forecast is accurate, right? If the model is able to forecast well on what you've already planned for, right, then the model has generalized well on your historical data. Once you have built enough confidence on forecast, then go to the optimization part, which is asking the reverse, right? Which is I need to reach somewhere, give me the mix. So this approach, there's no one-shot solution. It's not that the first model, you have absolute confidence on the first model, but that we can have a program or a process where over a couple of months, you can improve the model, you can build a lot of confidence on the process, right? That's possible.
Very cool. I like how you turned it, the software, like the people, human problems with attribution and measurement. Like it makes me think of in all the companies that I've worked at, like we never graduated or gravitated towards measurement minimization. We were always obsessed about measurement. And I'm curious to get your take if you think that, you're selling a measurement solution, but do you think that people are too obsessed about measurement? Like, do we really need to focus on measuring every channel, every campaign, every creative, like every piece of content, every email nurture? Like everyone is trying to justify their existence within the marketing team, and it's important to show your impact on metrics and stuff like that. But like from a marketing operations, marketing leadership standpoint, like do we need to obsess about measuring every single thing? Like, do you think teams should focus on significant channels and campaigns, significant sources that like burn real money and can scale when you like add a bunch of money to it and increase the budget? And insignificant in the sense that like, organic or email or direct traffic, like those things are meaningful, but like you can't really scale them by adding, 500K next month. Like how much do you attribute to this idea of like, should we just measure the stuff that matters? And like, how do you think about that? Like what matters in terms of measurement?
Yeah. So I have a slightly different perspective. Perhaps what I would say is there are some major factors, and it's absolutely important that you understand their impact with as much accuracy as possible, right? Because say your 10% of your spend goes to that one particular factor. So it's very important that you're very confident that it's driving your results. So you should perhaps measure everything, but the rigor that you apply could vary, right? You need not apply the same rigor on some of the newer channels or at a very granular creative level, right? You could have a slightly more relaxed approach towards that. Now, the truth is, you can only control what you can measure, right? So if you want to manage something, control for something, then you should have some measurement process for that. For brands which are just starting up, which does not have a lot of spend, you're still in one channel. In those cases, perhaps you could have a very scrappy measurement program in place, and that should solve most of your questions. It has got its own pitfalls as well. The experiment example that I mentioned, right? So if you introduce a new channel, if the experiment is not properly designed, you will make wrong inference from that. But you could be slightly mindful of these things, and you could perhaps manage everything yourself as well. But once things get complex, right, once you have more channels, some of which are offline, you have more sales channels, some of which are again not trackable. So when things get to that level, you'll perhaps need a more formal program of measuring things. But to come back to your question, of course, the core function is to drive business value, right? You've got a lot of things to worry about. So you should perhaps not put the same effort of measurement across everything that you're doing. You could prioritize what needs a lot of effort, a lot of focus, right? And what could be done with the quasi-causal approach, and where multi attribution is perhaps still okay-ish to use. You could perhaps balance the bandwidth or balance the rigor accordingly.
Very cool. I appreciate your thoughts there. Time is flying in our interview. This has been super fun, Rajeev. I got two last questions for you. It's, on the show we talk a lot about AI and AI agents on top of measurement, and there's a really cool overlap between those two areas. There's a lot of buzz with like agentic AI and marketing and systems that can make decisions and act with minimal human or marketing input. We know that like Lifesight has been talking about marketing intelligence agents. Do you envision this like near future where an AI agent is autonomously running marketing measurements and optimizations? Like you talked a lot about the unified framework where you're focusing on actions and business decisions. How automated is that going to be in the next couple of years? How are you thinking about that future?
Yeah, so we are super excited about what the evolution that we see around us in terms of Gen AI and agentic AI and Causal AI, right, and all of this. And we recently launched our first version of marketing intelligence agents. We call her Mia, and that's a phase one of our adoption of agentic AI, right? So the way we see it internally in Lifesight is there are two AI verticals that we work on. One is the measurement AI, right? Everything that is needed to make the entire measurement process more robust, which is to adopt Causal AI and some of the more latest things that's coming up in that space. Second part is agentic AI. So the primary purpose of adopting LLM and agents on top of the measurement stack is it would make things easier for the marketer to interact with the models, because for most of them, it's a bit of a learning curve, right? So they now need to get used to some very complicated statistical concepts. So it's not easy for most of them. So if we could create a conversational layer, so you could converse with this data, and thereby you could understand a lot of things. And while we build these conversational layer, we are also making sure that we become very transparent about the reasoning of these models or the agents, right? So when you ask some questions around, do we think we need creative refresh in Facebook campaign ABC, right, or tactic ABC? When the agent sort of replies with an yes or a no, there has to be proper reasoning, and that reasoning will need some human validation for some time. That's part number one. Second is, even when we generate next best action recommendations or optimization recommendation, at this point, we don't go and automatically change it in your downstream platforms. It waits for a user approval, right? So in near term, I think most of these agentic system will have a human in loop, because the cost of hallucination and wrong reasoning and all is very high, right? So it's very important that the human sort of comes in and approves things. But having said that, the primary use cases, so where an agent becomes better than a rule-based system is if your problem statement or if the user flow in itself is ambiguous, that you can't create rules and create a rule-based workflow. That's when an agent sort of comes in. But agent's interpretation of this ambiguity might not be very accurate as well. So in the near term, we think there would always be a human in the loop in the process. But long term, we don't know, right? 5 years down the line, because we see new protocols emerging. There's MCPs, there's A2A protocol. So the world is, I think, looking at a point in time when agents would talk to each other and all of that. But even in those days, I think there are a lot of ethical sort of guardrails also would come into picture. So we'll have to wait and watch. So one very sort of mentor model that I have is, if you're familiar with this. So before joining here, I was in the banking and financial industry. So I was building digital products for mutual funds and all of this. So I think this was in 2010 when there was this issue of flash crash in the US. I don't know if you're familiar with this.
Yeah,
Stock market suddenly fell down by, I don't know, 50, 60%. So essentially what happened that day is there was a bug when one of the autonomous trading platforms started selling a particular stock for pennies. And there were other automated platforms looking at the market, and they all went into panic mode. So these are agents. They were not talking to one another, but they were making inference from a common place, and things went haywire, right? So that's an agent-to-agent conversation actually happening even, say, 15 years back, right? So when agents starts talking to each other, we'll need a lot of guardrails in place. So we'll have to watch and see how that would evolve. So what we currently have is just certain protocols on how agents could talk, right? So MCP is also essentially a protocol how a LLM client could easily interact with API, right? So eventually how those things will evolve, we'll have to wait and watch. But we are super excited on what we see based on the initial traction from Mia, because a lot of marketers are now able to talk to these complex models in human language. And that, I believe, is a good start.
Very cool. Really appreciate your thoughts there. I got one last question for you. You're a founder, co-founder, CPO of a company, obviously a team leader. You're also an avid reader. You post a lot about the books that you read. You give a couple of shout outs today. You're also a father, which I'm sure is keeping you busy. I definitely empathize there. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all the stuff you're working on at work while staying happy?
Yeah. To start with the disclaimers, I don't want to make a claim that I figured out everything in life and all of that, but I primarily seek contentment, right? So that's how I approach everything in life. So there's this very cool concept called hedonic treadmill. I don't know if you're familiar with this. So
No.
we all have, as per this concept, we all have a baseline level of happiness in us. And regardless of major life events, we would eventually regress back to that baseline level of happiness. So even if you make $1 million tomorrow, you'll be very happy, but eventually your happiness will come down to your baseline level. Even if something very bad happens, it will come up to the baseline level eventually, right? And we've been talking about MMM models. So MMM model also has something called as a baseline, right? Which is, even if you don't invest in any of your marketing, you still make your baseline, right? So all of us have this a baseline level of happiness. So the thing is, how could we increase that baseline, right? So though I'm not a very religious person, I've read the bit in the Eastern spiritual tradition, Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of that, right? So one school of thought there is happiness is essentially a chemical reaction. So some of your neurotransmitters like oxytocin, serotonin, and all fire in certain ways, and you feel happiness. But all these hormones are in your head today, right? In your neurons. So can you just sit somewhere and make them fire and be happy without waiting for a external stimuli, right? So I think contentment is the key to that. So yeah, I've not figured out everything else, but these are some of the interesting ideas that I have about happiness. And one thing about having a daughter, so you also have a daughter.
Yeah, daughter. Yeah.
So perhaps for every man out there, that's an easy hack to increase your baseline happiness. So if you have a daughter, your baseline happiness increases, right? So that's an easy hack. It's not an easy hack, but it's a hack, right?
Yeah, definitely not always an easy hack, but I will say it has definitely increased my baseline happiness for sure. Love your answer. I feel like someone who is just checking out this part of the conversation is just like, oh, this guy must be a scientist or, or work with data to come up with that answer. But I love it. Thank you so much for your time, Rajiv. This has been super fun. Obviously, folks can check out Lifesight. Some of the stuff you're building is really fascinating in the space. Anything you want to plug? Anything exciting you're launching soon? This is going to be dropping in early July. But yeah, feel free to plug some stuff.
First, before that, thank you, Phil, for this opportunity. I'm not much of a conversationalist, but you made me feel very comfortable.
Awesome.
At Lifesight, we offer free 30 to 45 day evaluation for everyone, right? So we can have a conversation with any brand. And if you think that this brand would benefit from a unified measurement program, they could come in, they could test our system for 30 to 45 days. It's free. We can show some value. There are different ways in which we can create model and show that the model has good fit or not on your data and things like that. And after that, if they want to continue, there is a 1-year pilot program, right? Because this is not a one-shot solution. This is an iterative process. We are essentially building a process for you, a framework for you, right? So there's a 1-year pilot program. And as part of the pilot program, we would have a very detailed roadmap sort of drawn up for the brand, and we will go through that. And the whole point is through that pilot program, we would train your marketers on this causal inference processes and incrementality system and all of that. And eventually you could completely onboard Lifesight as your measurement tool. And then you can go ahead and build the rest of your business. You're not worried about measurements anymore.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Folks, link out the product and the site. Rajiv, this has been super fun. Thank you so much for your time. So I recently got my hands on the 2025 AI and Marketing Performance Index. This is research conducted by Growth Loop and Ascend2. They surveyed like 300 plus senior marketers across North America. And the report showed this really interesting disconnect between the hype around AI and the real world that marketers are working in today. A lot of teams still struggle with things like performance and speed. In the report, you'll discover things like how teams are leveraging AI within their current marketing cycles, from audience segmentation to insights, how marketers think about the AI and human partnership within their existing stacks, and the biggest hurdles marketers face with adopting AI and ways that they're overcoming them. Grab your copy at go.growthloop.com/report. The #1 conference for marketing ops and revenue ops professionals is back again this year. Block off your calendars from October 27th to the 29th in Anaheim, California. Grab your tickets at mopsapalooza.com while you enjoy some of the highlights from last year.
This event is legit.
Mopsapalooza is different because it's a practitioner's event.
Everybody learns from each other.
It's not a bunch of sales pitches.
This is the users community.
This year, we had over 300 submissions to speak. The sessions were selected and voted on by every single one of you. Marketing ops isn't just marketing. It's about so much more than that.
It's about getting inspired by each other to drive impactful change.
And when MoPros are fully aligned with broader business goals, we become the true driver of growth.
It is going to be an exciting few years ahead, and I really do believe that marketing ops is going to be at the absolute center of this.
See what's going on in the industry. You want to be on top of your game, this is the conference to come to.
It's the place to be. It's easily the best conference that you're going to go to all year.
Community is completely next level.